chat on cybersecurity. Today's cybersecurity challenges, opportunities, regional and global best practices in Africa. We're talking about identifying cyber vulnerabilities and mitigating them, developing a roadmap for operational coordination and cyber incident disaster prevention and recovery planning for cyber attacks, HMI and SCADA Dangers and Cybersecurity strategies, checklists for critical infrastructure, as well as cybersecurity for smart buildings and IoT devices. Well, for this fireside chat, we are joined by eminent speakers. First up, Confidence Staveley, the Cybersecurity Evangelist, Top 50 Women in Cybersecurity Africa 2020 finalist, founder, Cybersafe Nigeria. Well, Confidence is a cybersecurity awareness evangelist, cybersecurity professional, YouTuber, ethical hacker, information technology expert, author, and entrepreneur with over a decade worth of experience in technology. Thank you so much, Confidence, for joining us today. Pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Confidence. We also have Muyowa joining us, Cybersecurity Operations Manager and Senior Cybersecurity Specialist, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, Republic of South Africa. Muyowa has been leading the cyber initiatives in South Africa, paving the path for security in innovation and safety in development. He's a leader with years of experience driving change in Africa. Thank you so much, Muyowa, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
Pleasure. And ladies and gentlemen, joining us as the moderator for this wonderful chat, we've got Humphrey, who's joining us, Odhiambo, the Head of Partnerships and Content, CIO, East Africa, Kenya. Well, Humphrey, on the broadcasting front, has been a producer and director of self-initiated TV shows and documentaries, and has also been the editor of the prominent online and monthly magazine publications. Thank you so much, Humphrey, for joining us today live. Humphrey, you're on mute. Could I just request you to please unmute yourself? Apologies. Humphrey, if you can, yeah. Perfect.
Thank you. You can hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Great.
I'm so glad that you invited us.
Pleasure, pleasure. So ladies and gentlemen, with this, with our eminent panelists joining us, it is now time to share the screen with all of them being on the stage. Thank you so much, Humphrey. It's over to you to take forth the discussion. Thank you, and all.
Great. And to my panel, indeed, it's an awesome moment that we are converging during this great session that TrustCon has put together. And thanks, TrustCon, again. And we are going to begin with a lot of confidence. The name speaks by itself, confident lady from Nigeria. Kindly allow me just to pose to you in regard to the vulnerabilities that we keep identifying. In fact, we keep saying that they are there, but how are we managing them? Indeed, identification is one thing, and mitigating against them is another. So what, in your view, are the current prominent cyber threat vectors in Africa, and how are they being identified? Confidence?
Okay, so I would say from my work across Nigeria and other parts of the African continent that one of the biggest issues we're currently facing is still phishing. Phishing emails has remained a thing. Of course, we have seen a slight decrease in some parts of Africa because of increased awareness. We've also seen that has happened because of more stakeholders coming on board to speak about the issues and trainings in enterprises happening. General cyber awareness, beginning to catch up steam. I mean, we have a lot of these conversations we've been having during COVID, for example. So we're seeing that is a strong attack vector and has remained so. And phishing as an attack vector is literally very wide because it opens up the door to many other kinds of attacks. So from malware injection into the workplace, and given the fact that we've just come back from working from home to the workplace as well, we're seeing lateral movements of infections as well across networks in some in some companies and some organizations in Africa as well. So the work from home transitioning to working from the office has also come with some of those things we're noticing. So phishing has been a thing. We've also seen attack vectors strongly around social engineering, which phishing is a type of social engineering, but broadly across, looking at it from a more broad perspective, find a lot of people are losing money to scams that deploy a lot of social engineering to be successful. So social engineering is a big thing, and that's why awareness, we need to do more on the awareness bit of things. It's one thing to identify that this is a problem, and it's another thing to consistently communicate that in the way that people of different economic classes, people of different races, people of different tribes, can begin to understand what these issues are and how to protect themselves. We've also found that endpoint security issues have grown over time. I mean, people are using mobile devices way more than they're using their laptops. And on the go, these mobile devices continue to pose, pose a security threat because, for example, people will be more cautious about interacting on the computer than they would be on their phones, for example. So they're more prone to click links, they're more prone to downloading harmful software, they're more prone to installing harmful apps, they're more prone to also installing apps that scam them, for example. I mean, recently we found an app that is a loan app that of course gets to scam people and of course exfiltrate data. So we've seen that as well, and then we've seen ransomware as well making an entrance, and strongly so, across the continent. It's not making much of a headline as it is out of our continent, but it is happening even in financial institutions across. So yeah.
Fantastic, Confidence. We could not begin better with you setting that pace. Thanks so much, Confidence. And I believe, Muyowa, you could be having one or two insights also to throw in there.
Yeah, I think I just want to just give a thank you to the previous speaker, Confidence. I think she highlighted the key issues that the African continent is facing as a whole. And this also goes to the work that I also do across the continent. I think one of the biggest things, maybe just to add on to what she's saying, is as and when workers have began to return to the office, one of the interesting things that we saw was they brought a lot of malware back into the corporate environment. And basically what that meant was, as people were plugging onto the network, to get their services updated and things like that, there had to be sort of this staging area where we had to make sure that their laptops were fully up to date, patched and everything before they could join the rest of the corporate network. So you'd find that, like she's mentioned, there was a lot of phishing, there was a lot of ransomware attacks, there was a lot of command and control. Those are some of the other things that we saw. And then one other interesting thing that we also saw was for organizations that had USBs enabled on their laptops, one of the interesting things we saw was employees, while they're at home, if they only had one laptop, they plugged in external drives to watch movies or to watch entertainment or listen to music from their laptops. So when we came back into the corporate environment, this was one of the interesting things that we saw. And thank you.
Great. Thanks, Muyowa. I would like to make just a follow-up question to you. These threat vectors are happening at such a time that we are also finding that work patterns are changing. Place the blame squarely on Corona, which has actually changed our way of life right now. Now, quite a number of people are either working from home, as has been alluded by Confidence, and at the same time, others have absorbed the hybrid working formula. But then, even as this happens, we are still exposed. Now, to what extent are we exposed, and what ideally should we be doing to ensure that we mitigate these challenges that are before us?
All right. So in order to do this, we need to look at a tribe approach where we look at some of the people that we have enrolled in organizations. We also need to look at the processes, and then we also need to look at the technology that we're buying. So one of the interesting things is with people, we need to invest in people. A lot of the time, organizations are afraid to invest in people because they tend to leave for better opportunities. But a failure to invest means that you sit with people who are not competent to do their job, people who are not capable to do their job. So there has to be a skills development. And a lot of the time, organizations are keen to hire fully developed professionals when there's a lot of school kids who are leaving university, who are leaving schools, who are looking for opportunities for internships. And that becomes a very good ground. For example, in our institution, one of the biggest things we do is we take a lot of students in, educate them on cybersecurity as tier 1 analysts, and then see if they're interested in that field. So there needs to be, and I'm emphasizing the skills development in terms of people, because the technology supports people, and technology is only as useful as the people would be. And the processes also support that. So with regards to the technology, what the African continent needs to do is we consume a lot of technology from other continents, whether it's from the Americas, or whether it's from Europe, or whether it's from Asia, I think it's about time we start having this discussion on perhaps creating our own firewall, perhaps creating our own intrusion prevention system that is generated here in South Africa. And I think we need to start having that conversation because we already have a good skill set that we're developing. We can copy processes from international standards, but when it comes to technology, we are more consumers and we're not participating in terms of having something to say at the discussion table where decisions are made in terms of what new technologies should be placed in organizations. Thank you.
Okay, so I just
Very
want to
important
chime
point.
in.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Confident.
and before I chime in, I just want to make a joke because it's been on my mind to say, what do you know that you actually have a Nigerian name? If you switch the O in your name to an I, it's a Nigerian name straight up.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So maybe I would call you the Nigerian version of your name, but what you were saying was just so profound. I mean, whenever we think about technology, we think about ensuring cyber safety or cybersecurity in organizations, people, that's the fundamental, getting the people, process, and technology in place. Knowing that the process and the technology is actually supporting the people, meaning that people is the strongest pillar. And I really want to commend your organization for putting in those things in place to just train people. And just, piggybacking on that, the role of, again, speaking about people, the role of governance, again, in the organization is going to drive some of these changes. I mean, a lot of organizations across Africa do not have the right cybersecurity governance in place. Do you have a CISO in your organization? Who does the CISO report to? What is the power of the CISO? How much funding is intentionally set aside for the CISO to carry out his work? How much is invested in developing people? The skills that are required to protect the organization needs to be inculcated. If you're hiring ready-made people, are you paying them the price, or you're just saying, you know what, we'll just get someone who can do everything and then pay them some peanuts? They definitely will not be staying for long. So if you're not going on that path, then you should be developing people. And whether or not you're bringing in people who have the right skill set already, it's important that they continue to upskill and grow their skill set and upgrade whatever they know, because the threats are evolving, and so will the knowledge required to fight the cyber criminal. So the people pillar is such a strong pillar, but we don't talk so much about it. And that's on the technical side of things. On the non-technical side of things, like the people that are the end users of technology, how often are we training them in cyber hygiene? How often are we reminding them about their role as the front line defense, to cyber attacks? How often are we reminding them about what they can do and the power they have to protect their organizations in every time they put in their computers and work on their pieces? It's important that we don't make this, practically speaking now, it's important that we don't have cybersecurity awareness trainings once a year just to tick one box in some compliance requirements. We have to make it more of a cultural thing where everybody understands the role and is done frequently, so we understand how the threats are evolving and they're practically shown to people. How are scam emails beginning to look like? They are no longer so obvious anymore. They are now spear phishing attacks. Do your employees understand how what form it takes? So it's not a one-off thing. It's a continuous process and it's a journey. It's not a destination we can arrive at. It's a journey, but we have to continuously work towards keeping the organization safe. But very importantly, the goal shouldn't be cybersecurity. Absolutely, it should be cyber resiliency. How resilient is the organization to, one, be able to identify, contain, and recover very quickly from a cyber attack? I mean, we're seeing very, very strongly how important this recovery process is in this day and time.
Yeah, these are very salient issues that you have raised, Confidence. And when you're talking about cyber resilience, Muyowa, probably you could guide us, because we have very interesting institutions in Africa that probably would be steering this wheel so that there's a lot of sustainability. For instance, like the African Union. How can the African Union, or even some institutions within the countries that we belong to, ensure that there's sustainable growth in cybersecurity from a people process? Because Confidence squarely mentioned that we are ignoring the element of people. We only think about them much later. So just to ensure that there's a people, process, and technology perspective, continuity of the same, and then we ensure that security is more fortified within the continent.
So I think that's a very good question. And just going back to what Confidence already started with, when you talk about governance, one of the interesting things when you look at our organizations in Africa is that the security team is further down in terms of the people processes. In the sense that a security manager has 3 or 4 layers to report into senior management. And that becomes a bit of a challenge, because when we think about security, it becomes a last thought. We want to call the security team when something has gone wrong, but we don't want to call them when we are planning on doing something. So we are planning on changing some business aspect or introducing some business aspect, and we don't call them into that discussion. And one of the things we can do to improve the resilience is security needs to have a seat at the table where the decisions are made, where business is deciding which direction to go in. Because at that level, what security can do is, in as much as the legal team is there, in as much as the finance team is there, they are there to identify pitfalls that the company could fall into when they're deciding on a new business venture. And so the role that security would play is to then identify and say, how can we continue to do business while we're pursuing this new venture, while we're pursuing this new direction in terms of where the company wants to go, while we're making these decisions? How can we ensure that if something goes wrong, we are able to continue to do business? Us being allowed to continue to do business, that's it, in essence, the reason why we have resilience. Resilience doesn't mean that we're being attacked. Resilience means that while we're being attacked, while we're remediating issues, we're still servicing our customers. We're still working with our third parties. We're still working with our partners. And that becomes a key thing. And it goes back to the governance. It goes back to the processes. How far down is the security team? Is the security team reporting to an operations manager who is responsible for something that is not security related? Or is security allowed a seat at the table where the decisions are made? And I think that is how we can keep resilience within Africa when it comes to the organizations within this country. Thank you.
Great insight there, Muyowa, certainly. A Confidence, just plunging just slightly deeper on the areas that we have invested in, for instance, like medical sector, we have supervisory control and data acquisition. There are structures that we've also invested in. How can or how should African countries ensure that its digital transformation infrastructure are not so exposed? And at what juncture should they be doing this?
I mean, what Muyowa was saying was just very profound as well, because what he was describing was security by design in the enterprise. And I would say it's at that point where before they get the technology in, that's the best point. The next best point to ensure security is adopted in the organization is yesterday. And the next best point is today. So, while we may not have had security by design for lots of our SCADA devices, and we already have them deployed around the place, we should ensure that we have a process. Again, that's why it comes back to the people and process when we're talking about technology as well, is that we have a process in place for scheduling risk assessment. We need to be able to fully understand what the risks are. So what are the risks, of a cyber attack? What are the loopholes? What are the threats that could be? What are the threats out there? What are the vulnerabilities that can be exploited by those threats? What is the likelihood of a cyber attack? And in the event of a cyber attack, what is the impact to the business? And then by doing that risk assessment, you'll be able to identify what you call your crown jewels. What are the things that are very, very high priority for your organization to keep running, for your business to keep running? And you identify them, and then you deploy resources to fully protect them. But you see, without that process of risk assessment, you can't even identify what are the priorities for your business. That means you may be applying the same level of funding for protecting a printer than you would for protecting a device that makes sure that a patient's high blood pressure is controlled, a patient's blood pressure is monitored. You see, so you need to be able to check what your crown jewels are and be able to then apportion the right resources to protect them. Resources might not necessarily only be money, but basically be able to protect them, and then you can then begin to go down on your priority list, ensuring that you're able to take care of the risk, mitigate the risk, or accept the risk. So that risk assessment is very, very vital. We must begin to be intentional about doing it the first time and redoing it, because it's a continuous process. It's a cycle. Most times people do risk assessment and it's one-off. It's not a one-off thing. It's something that once we have these SCADA devices, it should be continuous. There's a reassessment that is required from time to time. And I want us to see this assessment or this risk assessment not as just something to say, okay, I'm compliant. We have gone past the stage where compliance becomes the ultimate. Compliance is actually the basic minimum. Compliance is the base, like the barest minimum. That's what compliance is. That means that there's a place higher than that, which we must all aim to attain. So when we've gotten to that point where we become compliant, we can then build up on that. But I want to just emphasize that risk assessment is very necessary. It's also very necessary, of course, as part of risk assessment, to continuously upgrade the technology. So if you're deploying devices that do not have upgrades, I don't know what to say. There has to be an upgrade process in place. There also has to be a process, for example, where default credentials have to be changed. Once they are deployed or before they're even deployed. And then those credentials continue to be updated and changed from time to time. We are seeing the impact of how cyber attacks in another part of the world can snowball, and cause a lot of other damage across the world in different other parts that had nothing to do with it. I mean, case in point can be colonial pipelines. The fact that they had that cyber incident caused quite a lot of knock-on, and I dare say there might have been fire incidents as well in America because of that, because people were collecting fuel and storing them in their houses as well. You see, so cybersecurity has moved past being something that happens in tech. It's something that actually is an underlying and governing part of the rest of our lives. So we have to treat it with that level of seriousness, and of course, apportion the right resources towards protecting them. So I'm going to end my list here and just say risk assessment. Risk assessment is very necessary, not as a one-off, but something that we periodically do to identify and know what our risks are, and of course, be able to take the right measures to mitigate them.
Mm-hmm.
You're so fired up, Confidence. I believe we could have gone on and on listening to you. At some point, though, we could have made sure that we are going to interrupt you. Let's just change gears a bit and look at the smart buildings. Lately, we are also talking about ensuring that even our education institutions become smarter. The more we become smarter, we are using smart devices, we even become more challenged, more exposed. Now, and this brings in the question of deploying IoT technologies. Since the ubiquitous connectivity and remote operations in IoT brings with it many security concerns, what in your view should be the way forward for Africa? How should we be deploying this so that we are equally fortifying the infrastructure that we are putting in place?
Yeah, so that is a very loaded question, and I'm going to answer the first part of it, and I think Confidence will take the second part of it. So where I would like to start with this is IoT is everywhere. It's unavoidable. Whether someone brings it into the organization is under the bring your own device policy, or someone brings it in as a rogue device, because some of these IoT devices, what we've seen is they do have some capability to somehow connect to the internet, to the network, corporate network, whether it's through the laptop or with an employee's laptop that is connected to a phone, that is connected to their watch. So you do find that there is two ways they come in, whether it's bring your device or, sorry, what's the word for it? Unauthorized. So the biggest challenge that needs to happen and how we need to solve this is we need to create network segmentations for our corporate networks. When we introduce Internet of Things, whether it's on a company policy, whether we're introducing a new smart board, it needs to be in an environment where if anything happens to that device, because general nature of IoT devices is they're built without security. And lately, we are now starting to see a lot of these devices, security being introduced. But the reality is the fundamental core aspect of IoTs is there isn't much security on those devices. We don't change passwords as often as we would like to. So we need to segment the network that these devices are connected to. That's the first thing. We need to be able to identify these devices. So identifying is a very critical thing when it comes to the world of security, because if you do not identify the assets that is causing a threat on your network, then you don't have an element of visibility. You're not seeing what is happening on your network. So you need to identify the assets and you need to properly classify them and then put them in a separate network. And then one of the other interesting thing is we obviously need to update, but the challenge with IoT is these devices usually, their update cycles in terms of patches and security updates take longer. And the challenge that you see there is we need to then put them in an environment, going back to that network segmentation, where should that device be compromised, it doesn't touch the rest of the crown jewels that Confidence spoke of, where we look at the risk from a broader perspective and we say, this area of the network, only certain devices are allowed to access this network. We can't have IoT devices accessing, for instance, our directory services, our finance management systems. So from that perspective, we need to have that approach. The other thing that I would like to speak about is there needs to be a user awareness training, where we're not only training users to use the systems, but also the dangers of introducing too many IoT devices, especially when employees started working from home, which a lot of the organizations in Africa are still doing, who haven't returned back to work. So in such cases, you'll find that because organizations are still having employees working from home, it means that your corporate laptop is on the same network as a compromised IoT device. So we need to also think about that in terms of the perspective and the dangers and the risks that are associated with that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Muyowa. That equally was so elaborate, so detailed. I believe Confidence will have to give also some bit of additions at this level from a use case that has been there in the marketplace.
Sorry, say that again, Humphrey.
Yeah, you have some use case probably that revolves around IoT that you'd like to share at this juncture?
Oh, I don't have one readily to mind right now, but IoT devices are beginning to infiltrate most urban areas. I mean, in my country, for example, it would range from things like automatic lighting in homes, to smart fridges beginning to make an entrance in homes as well, and in the workplace as well. And I mean, the more fashion inclined IoT devices would be like the wristwatches. They're beginning to do things like give us preview of our emails, for example. So we're having that point where the enterprise and is beginning to really, will I say, touch with IoT devices as well. And then for buildings, for buildings for the enterprises as well, there are smart devices that help around, you know, solar electricity as well. They're smart devices that are connected to a lot of things around building components. So the key thing as well with those devices is, again, I'll go back to risk assessment. In the event of a cyber attack, how would you manage devices? How will those devices being remotely shut down, for example, impact your work in the organization? And then begin to put in measures in place to protect the organization. One of them which Muyowa has just shared is segregation and segmentation of the network. So segmenting those devices to be on a different portion of the network that maybe is a bit more forward facing, and maybe also in deploying defense in-depth approach, you know, where it's layered. And so you can have an area where anything can be contained easily, will be a very good route to go with managing IoT devices. But running away from them isn't practical in this day and time. You're not going to be asking your device, you're going to be asking, I mean, if you take, say, a floor in a building, you're not going to be asking the owners of the building to remove all the IoT devices. You're not going to be doing that, or you're not going to be asking your staff not to come into work with their wristwatches they bought for $500 or, you know. So it's important that we become more practical in dealing with them.
Great. I can see our next panelists or presenters are equally preparing, but then this is becoming even more exciting towards the end. But we have about, say, 4 minutes or so just to wind up. Probably we could begin with you, Muyowa. Looking ahead, say 2025, to what extent should we be talking of fortifying Africa against these odds? Now, take into account that, yes, this is the moment we are accelerating our digitization, but at the same time, we need to ensure that we secure our systems appropriately. Just in closing, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a bit loaded, but I'll try and be brief. So I think what Africa needs to do as a continent is that, like I mentioned, we need to focus more on how do we train our people? How do we organize technology that can allow us to do business? Because as we're stepping out of the analog era into the digital era where everything needs to be digitalized now, we need to do so in a secure manner, because failure to do so could mean the downfall of a company that could have been a company that provided jobs for people in Africa. So we need to do so with caution. And what we've mentioned throughout the discussion, things like risk assessments, governance, and I think Confidence can speak more about that stuff. We need to have these as at the core of whatever we do. And with that, thank you.
Great. To you, Confidence, confidently close for us this.
Okay, I think very strongly we have to work on cross-sector and cross-country collaboration if we must succeed. We have cyber criminals collaborating so much, and that's why they have continuously, sort of, this is arguably succeeding. I mean, really, really winning this war so far. But to win this war like we want to win it, and to the measure we want to win it, we have to work more together. we're seeing a bit more collaboration within sectors, and that's why my emphasis is on cross-sector, especially sharing the learnings from incidents, especially as they are unfolding. I mean, this is done so well in the finance sector, but imagine if this was done in manufacturing as well, where one, for example, in the finance sector, one bank is getting attacked and they're sharing on the WhatsApp group with the CISOs and saying, this is happening here, you know, the vulnerability is being exploited, you know, and then you share that information across. What if that's happening across the health sector as well? But aside that, what if the health sector, the finance sector, the manufacturing are talking to themselves and sharing this information as the incidents are unfolding and what they learn after them? I think this cross-pollination of ideas and cross-pollination of ways to tackle incidents is very great for us. Collaboration is very key. We also need to collaborate across countries. There's some countries that are more mature in their cybersecurity journey than the others. We need to be able to share notes. I mean, some countries currently, aside having the privacy policies, have laws, they have a strategy. I mean, for example, Nigeria has just set out a strategy for 5 years. Whether or not it's being implemented is another conversation altogether. But we need to have this sort of intentional approach to having roadmaps, because that's what the strategy is, roadmaps to tackle cybersecurity issues over the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and actually work at it. And we need to have all African nations come together towards doing that in their own domains, and of course share notes. It's important that we come together this much and collaborate, because it's going to really, really change the game as to how prepared we'll be for different cyber attacks as they unfold, and how quickly we're going to recover as well, especially for the public sector.
Thank you so much, Confidence. And your co-panelist also, Muyowa from South Africa. This one you couldn't nail better. Honestly, you've talked from the depth of your hearts. And as I sign off, handing over to Van, I just want to make a small statement. And picking up from where Confidence has also shared. If nature is also making sure that there is cross-pollination, how about our security? Oh. If even the animals that can live, let's say the Serengeti National Park, and come and get pregnant in Kenya. So what about us? To what extent should we be collaborating when it comes to elements security? The onus is really on us. Over to you, Anna. Thanks so much for giving us a chance.
Thank you, Humphrey, for joining us and conducting this amazing fireside chat so wonderfully between Confidence, you and Muyowa. Thank you so much for your valuable time today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers. God bless.
Thank you.